Welcome to Curious and Unqualified, a podcast about life in academia. I'm your host, Eric Edlund, professor of physics.
I'm Jeremy Jimenez, professor of foundations and social advocacy.
So, Jeremy, what's on your mind tonight?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe we could talk today about why we think students go to college historically. What's the narrative and myths about why they should go now, and what is their actual, perhaps, reasons for going to college? Because we see a lot of colleges closing. A good friend of mine, colleague, her school's in danger of cutting a lot of programs because of enrollment. Ithaca College recently by us axed like 180 professors.
And a couple programs.
Yeah. So programs are getting cut, enrollment's down, but some students are still going. So I guess it's interesting to think about those who still go to college. Why do they go to college? There's probably some real hard data, but this will be a mix of facts and speculation.
And we had two other colleges nearby, Wells College and Cazenovia, that have also recently gone under. So it seems to be hitting the small liberal arts colleges harder or sooner. I think hard times are coming for everyone to varying degrees.
Yeah, and I actually, when I was on the job market, I had kind of my current position I was interviewing for, and there was another college that I was also kind of advancing and invited to the campus visit. And a professor who I told about my two options, she kind of like pulled me aside. She's like, that college might be having some financial issues. And sure enough, like a year or two ago, it became an institute. Like it shut down as a college.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, having been on faculty job search committees, we're also sometimes the applicants from like colleges, which we quickly look up and we say, oh yeah, that college is shutting down.
That creates an interesting opportunity for colleges like ours that have neighboring colleges that have gone out of business. Good chance for us to scoop up some experienced professors. So,
and to our credit, as a public institution, we're generally more affordable than private schools, and so that makes us a better value bargain. That's one of the narratives often thrown around at our campus. What a great value for the money, which I do think is mostly true. So I guess we'll do a little jump into historical reasons. Obviously, early on, higher education was not available to everyone. There were privileged people, mostly white males who went to college. Only slowly over centuries was the franchise expanded to others. But, even through the 19th century, now we kind of assume you go to college to get a job. But in the 19th century, it was really more of like, you make connections, or, you have interesting experiences, or you just enjoy the learning for learning. Maybe you go there to meet your future partner. Only kind of later in the 20th century that it became explicitly tied as an engine for economic opportunity, right? And this is all part of the credentialism of, which has probably happened in most places, but clearly happened in the United States, where basically as one threshold is reached, which opens up a certain opportunity, like the expansion of high schools, once high schools became required, a high school degree was no longer like something that can kind of give you a leg up in the job market. So then suddenly college became the new frontier. And then, of course, once you have people, especially at the GI Bill, a lot of people going to college, okay, well, now the college degree is starting to become more of like the default credentials for a lot of professional jobs. Okay, well, now it's about the master's degree, or it's about where did you go to college? And so, like, now there's this kind of race where, there's more requirements for master's degrees. Of course, there's some signs that actually retracting.
What is retracting?
In New York State, for example, you have been for a long time been required to have a master's degree within 5 years of teaching, but now there's significant talk that it's going to make more flexible options.
That's largely because the public school system has had a difficult time recruiting and retaining teachers, and so they're trying to lower the bar to give people other options. Once you start down a professional career and you start teaching, regardless of what you're teaching, it's a lot of work. And to imagine throwing on evening classes and working on a master's degree while in your first 5 years of teaching, we know it takes a lot, like years to get a classroom and a class like dialed in. And to do that while you're studying for an advanced degree, that seems terribly onerous.
Yes, but I didn't do that myself. I started with a master's degree before I started full-time teaching. But a more cynical interpretation would be the schools don't want to pay for you getting the master's degree, as well as they don't want to necessarily pay the higher salary, which especially in a lot of public schools with unions, you're guaranteed a certain pay bump with the master's degree. So they could say they're doing it out of empathy with the overworked teachers, but it could also be just a way for districts to save money. But anyway, yeah, so the credentialism is often what has led people to this rat race of going to the next higher degree for the same position with higher debt and based on broader change in the economy, not necessarily a better standard of living. And so college has always been tied to better income for many decades. It's now starting to not look as clear. I don't think we can say there's clear evidence that that relationship is going away, but I don't think that relationship is as strong as it has been in the past few decades.
One thing the president of our college likes to say is that a college degree can break the cycle of poverty in one generation. And I think that's probably largely true, right? It can really open doors for a lot of people. On the other hand, I think we have to keep in mind that there's also a huge discrepancy in terms of lifetime earning potential based upon what degree you get. And they're not equal by any stretch of the imagination. If you rank the degree types from highest earning to lowest earning, at the top end you have engineering, chemistry, economics, anything math heavy is up at the top. And then you get into
social sciences,
psychology, et cetera,
humanities,
right? Yeah, the teaching stuff is in there as well, the education degrees. And then at the bottom, you have art. One thing that parents and families are starting to think more about is, well, what is the earning potential for a degree? And this is, I think, why you see a lot of people going into things like business economics programs, right? Is that those programs tend to be fairly accessible to a lot of students, and there's decent money to be made there, right? So it seems to be something that's growing.
Yeah, and I often wonder, too, how many of our students, college, was it ever a choice for them, right? Like, I obviously it is for some, especially for non-traditional students and students who don't go straight out of high school. But I suspect for a lot of students, their parents went to college, so they were going to go to college, and they just kind of repeat that. And so it's interesting to think then why the drop in enrollment. I mean, some of it is no doubt demographics, right? There's just simply less children born as the years progress. But then you have to wonder, is it calculations made of like, oh, I had an older brother or sister who got a college degree and they went a lot of debt and they couldn't get the job they were hoping to get, and now they're 40, 50 years old and they're still paying off that debt. If that starts to make students who otherwise would have been a prime candidate for college not seeing it as desirable.
And I suggest there's a third reason why people are not going to college, which is the political backlash. Right? There's a lot of people on the right who I think have grown distrustful of academia and see it as kind of an institution dominated by the left.
What has been your experience of your students, if you compare when you first started teaching to now, 7 years later? Obviously, COVID significantly shook things up. But do you feel like when you look at your classes, the students have a very different attitude towards college than before?
It's really difficult for me to sort through my experience and pull out a trend. I've had every year really great students and not so great students. And I guess I have a vague sense that it's getting a bit worse in time, but I also feel pretty inspired by a number of the students that I have in my class. I feel like the good is getting better, at least since COVID, and the bad is getting worse at the same time. Like there's a growing divergence.
A tale of two students.
Yeah. Maybe that's representative of a growing cultural divide of some sort and different attitudes towards learning in school. What have you seen?
There was a definite drop off as far as I've noticed. I think most professors to varying degrees have lowered their expectations of what's an acceptable workload for students through COVID and since after COVID. Yeah, and it's hard to know how much of that was sort of like the learning loss, that wherever you were in the educational ladder, your COVID years were for most people learning lost years. And so so playing catch up could be very frustrating and just make college harder, more difficult, and you might be less motivated. Maybe there was just a sense of hopelessness that came about through that transition, right, of all the loneliness and all the mental health anxiety. But then the other issue, too, which is probably less an issue in your class and it's more in educational science, is AI, where we're increasingly finding students just handing in things with little thought to even prevent detection. increasingly I'm trying to structure my assignments to be what's AI proof, right? Where it's not as easy to just plug something in a prompt to get an AI answer. But then I'll be surprised where I get it. Like I remember I asked a student, what do you want to learn in this course? I thought it was a pretty open prompt. You can't get this wrong. You can say anything. And I got this, there are two schools of thought on no. So I think that the availability of turning the AI prompt, right, it just further makes you be like, oh, I can procrastinate further because in the end, if I don't have time, I can just AI it. And then, especially if they get away with it, and they get away with a lot of classes for professors who don't have the time to, more diligently, or they don't have the time to look for it, or they see it, but they don't want to deal with the consequences, right? Because going through a plagiarism case is a lot of work. We're really busy as professors, and to follow that through the proper channels, it's do I really want to add an extra 20 hours of work this week?
And there's another wrinkle to that, which is that say you call one student on the use of AI plagiarism or whatever you want to call it. Fine, you caught that one student, but what about the other 10 that you suspect are doing it but didn't call?
It's not as clear, right? The evidence wasn't as clear.
And I think we kind of have an obligation to call it when you see it and know it's happening, but it still feels like there's a lot of gray areas out there that we're not really well equipped to deal with.
So going back to why students are in college, do you sense that what's your breakdown of the students that understand college is the thing I have to do to get the degree, to get the job, so that's why I'm here, versus college is just something I had always do, and my parents, expect me to go there, and they're paying for it, so why not? Or college is this great opportunity to learn, and I'm here to explore different courses, and I understand it leads to a job, but I'm not so focused on that. I'm actually really looking forward to just all the interesting things I can learn in class. How would you say that those...
Again, I feel very fortunate this semester with the particular group of students I have in my upper division class. I think they're all really dedicated. There are some who will pretty clearly express that they're doing it for the degree because they need it for job promotion reasons. But even still, I see them putting in a good effort and really... I think I also have the benefit that this is a really interesting class to teach where we get to talk about climate change and resource scarcity and nuclear power and all sorts of really cool subjects. So I think it's easy for them to buy into this class. In my intro classes, again, I see, again, a wide range there and a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are some sullen faces who look like they don't want to be there. They don't know why they're there. It looks like, I feel like I'm torturing them, right? Not to say that that's everyone by any stretch of the imagination, but that exists.
Of course, it's natural for upper division classes to generally have more motivated people, right? Because they're definitely there because they choose to be there.
Yeah.
But what's, I guess, one of the sad things about the trajectory of higher ed is that because of budget shortages and allocations and shrinking, disappearing departments, in general, there's more pressure for more professors to teach intro-level courses and not the more specialized courses they would like to teach.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely true in our department. We're a very small department, and many of our upper division courses are now on an every other year rotating schedule. Partly that's a staffing issue, but partly it's just that our enrollments tend to be so low that they can't justify teaching them more often. What do you see in the education world in terms of student motivation and goals? Are they here because parents are telling them to get a degree, or?
You always have to be wary of students just saying things they think you want to hear. But I do think in general, so it's kind of a bad habit of a lot of advisors, they won't say it themselves, but they'll kind of echo this and say it about getting the gen ed classes out of the way. So this whole idea when they make their schedule.
I say that all the time.
Yeah. It's I think most advisors do say it.
Which is so funny that, it's we're supposed to believe in the value of gen ed as this broadening experience. And
right.
It just feels like this, just a burden that you want to just get out of the way as quick as possible.
Obviously, it's a lot is dependent on the professor of those gen ed courses and how invested in they are in their teaching, as opposed to just research or whatever. But I think that mentality, when students come in with that mentality and advisors echo that, it does kind of have the impact that these are classes that are a burden, are a chore, as opposed to what can I learn about sociology? What can I learn about mathematics?
Yeah, at the same time, I encourage students to try to get their gen eds done. for a very practical reason that
course.
allows you then to focus more.
Right, and when you don't know exactly what you want to do, you're kind of exploring. Yeah.
I also do try to tell them, like, there's a huge range of courses for you to take out there. Find something you're interested in.
Right.
And it's not my place to advise you on that because there's so many options. Like I can advise you on physics courses that you should take. I can't tell you whether you should take, an art history course or a studio art class. Like that's up to you to figure out.
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation to have about gen ed courses because, and again, I bring this up because our students will generally say, once they get to education courses in their junior year, or like the few education courses they have along the way, they love the education courses compared to the gen ed stuff. They just feel it's like just chores, particularly because in the education classes they see it very much because IT students have a very specific career in mind. They're in the teacher preparation program, right? So they like the education classes where they're actually giving classroom scenarios and they get to think about the broader issues of school funding and inequality, et cetera. But like if the students don't want to be taking the gen ed courses, right? Probably the parents wouldn't mind it, right? Save them money, get them out of college sooner. And the advisors and professors themselves are saying, have the attitude to get them out of the way. Like, why do we have them, right? It's an argument like, is it just a matter of that's the path dependence of the bureaucracy? Like, that's the system when we're stuck with it. Is it like paying homage to this ideal of like broadening your education that like we say we believe in, but maybe doesn't actually function like that anymore? Is it a matter of like job security where if you got rid of the gender requirements, well then all of a sudden a lot of professors would not be able to meet their requirement for courses and there'd be either staff cuts or no more hiring.
So it's basically welfare for some of the humanities classes.
Right. So I'm saying like what would be the defense of gen ed when it seems like all the stakeholders, except perhaps for the professors who teach them, don't want these courses to be there.
That's interesting. Yeah. My personal perspective is that there's a lot of value in them. I would like to see there be fewer constraints on this and a broader range of courses that students could select from. Because we're very pigeonholed. You have to take like a world history and this and that. Yeah. And I get they want students to pick up a greater awareness of issues and cultures and also take a course in natural sciences and take a quantitative skills, a math class. All that makes sense to me. And so I don't want to diminish it. When I was a student, an undergraduate student, I graduated with something like 220 credit hours, almost twice a degree, because I was just taking, for no reason, I took like 2 semesters of Latin, I took a bunch of philosophy courses. I was just taking anything that I thought was really cool.
Oh no! I remember my one of my good friends. It was like a ritual. Like when the course catalog came out back then, it was it was like the book. Like it was like it came out this week. It came out, and then we literally go back to the dorm and like, look, they're actually offering this cool crime course or this cool astronomy course. And it was like this real excitement. And then and I think you and I might have had more freedom in the course we took than the really structured program that a lot of our students have. Like. It was a great joy to be able to.
It was a great joy, and what's gotten really onerous now is the financial aid constraints that are coming down to us from the state and the federal government. And I get why people are doing it. There's a sense that we need to watch and oversee how federal dollars are being spent or state dollars are being spent on things like financial aid. Like I get it, we need some oversight there, but I think it's taken to. There's just too much bean counting going on. And we have students ending up now in these weird situations. It particularly affects transfer students in really terrible ways. Transfer students will come in with all of their GEs done, but none of their majors courses done. And financial aid, under certain conditions, there's lots of different kinds of financial aid. Some financial aid will not allow students to take any classes that do not directly contribute to their degree progress. And so you might have, especially in a small department like ours, where we're only offering some courses every other year, right? You might only have physics and math classes left, but there's only 3 classes you can take. So that's 9 credit hours. And
you fall below.
And you fall below full-time status, and there's nothing else you can take because you've used up all your electives, you've taken all your GE, and what do you do then? And there's some weird loopholes and stuff that people have figured out how to kind of make this work. Kind of by backfilling credits. I don't even understand what they do. But the point that I'm trying to make here is it just shouldn't be this way. It's stifling students. and it's actually inhibiting them from learning when they want to learn. If we could just give them the chance to take a few more elective classes or something, like that would be wonderful for everyone. Why not just lift the bar on the number of credit hours that you can take under financial aid to something like 150? Give people an extra 30 or 40 credit hours of buffer. And there's also students who change majors, and there's all sorts of conditions that can arise where students can get caught in these really terrible traps. And I think a little bit more flexibility would be great for the students and for the institution.
Yeah, and it's really, of course, it's very difficult to evaluate teacher effectiveness. But I know there are patterns of the courses, the gen ed courses my students take, where the professors are awful, right? Often awful because they don't show any excitement for teaching. They're, assigning same textbook for like 50 years or whatever.
But to that point, though, it is really, really tough. Teaching is a relationship between the teacher and the class, and with the students with each other as well. But it's hard to be putting out positive energy when you're getting cold stares and people who are like playing with their phone and looking like they want to be anywhere else in the world but there. But I interrupted you. Sorry.
Yes, but that wouldn't explain the patterns, right? Because if all professors are having the experience of the disengaged students, why are there these patterns of the same professors are complaining about, these nightmare courses that what's often happened in our program is we advisors, we end up telling them, oh, don't take that here, take that at a community college where you'll have a better experience, right? And so there's no easy way to judge professor effectiveness, and I think sometimes unfairly professors that simply hold high standards can get bad reviews in that sense. But
we should do a whole session on course teacher evaluations.
That I think would be very
I have all sorts of problems with this system here, but.
Yeah, we should definitely talk. There's a lot of interesting things we could say about that, about how it shapes your teaching or it doesn't shape your teaching, biases involved and all that. Yeah, so we'll definitely put that on the docket for another episode. But I do think professors have an obligation to meet the students where they are while upholding certain rigor and standards that are required for what you think they should need to know. And
that is one of the big points of tension, is that I think we see it very clearly in physics, where we've seen a general degradation of math skills and also general science knowledge coming into our intro classes. And I agree with you completely that we need to meet students where they are. At the same time, we have an obligation, and I think a very reasonable goal, of getting students to a particular endpoint.
Yeah.
And what's happening is that the distance between their starting point and their end point is just growing larger.
Sure.
And so how do you close that distance in the same amount of time with the same classes? In essence, I think what needs to happen, and this is a very big conversation, there's some that we can do as teachers, but my honest opinion on this is that the amount of control that we have as teachers over these types of situations is maybe 10%. And the conversation that we collectively need to have more of is the responsibility on the student. We hear so much about, teachers inspiring students, and I get that there are some teachers out there who, for whatever reason, like you said, maybe they're using the same textbook. They've been using the same textbook for 40 years, and they're burned out, and they don't bring any enthusiasm in there. That's not all teachers.
No, of course not.
Right? And it's not even the majority of teachers. And so we can talk about how teachers can do more, can do better. But I think by and large, the quality of teaching that we are giving our students is better than we often got when we were in school.
Oh, yeah, because we're at a teaching institution.
Well, there's that, but I think there's just been a growing awareness overall throughout academia of how to teach better. This has been in conversation for many years. And probably the teaching experience that our teachers gave us was better than they got back in the 50s or 60s or 70s, whenever they were in college. And so I think we're reaching a point of diminishing returns in that conversation. And the emphasis really needs to switch at this point to what more can the students do. And I think we're seeing, in particular with Gen Z, a work ethic issue.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to think of the perspective of, if we have students that are coming in saying they hate this class, they're failing it, it's not interesting, the professor's not hearing them, etc., right? And there's these patterns, right? It's just many students. their parents would love to save the money. If the point of the gen ed courses is you're getting this broad education and exposure to ideas, but if you're not having that experience in the class, right, like you don't feel like you're getting exposed to ideas because of either unwillingness or lack of ability of a professor, like it just is wasting everyone's time.
That is true.
And so because we're not having a situation of kids crowding to get into colleges, we have a situation of under-enrollment. So if we're trying to retain students to keep colleges as viable institutions of learning and credentials and socialization and all that, I think we have to consider ways, if there are patterns of courses that students don't find valuable. Now, I understand as a professor of race, class, gender studies, this can get tricky, right? Because what if certain students don't want to learn about racism, right? There's got to be ways to make it engaging for students. And I think you see this in students that speak highly of taking certain classes and not taking other courses of the same course across sections. And if we're going to have this commitment to broad education, it's got to actually serve that goal. And because what often seems is it's just meeting credits. And if just meeting credits, it's just a waste of money, waste of time.
Well, that's part of the, I don't want to say failure, but one of the difficulties of working in a state bureaucratic system is that there's a whole lot of inertia there, and things do not change quickly, and we get stuck in patterns very easily. Both on the micro scale, like within an institution, about what GE classes are offered, how many GE classes need to be taken by the students, which for us is those are types of decisions that are made at the state level that get passed down to all of the state institutions. But then you have inertia of a different scale. Even we were talking earlier about the decreasing enrollment we're seeing. Well, we have other sister institutions who have programs, or maybe even the entire institution at something like 50% enrollment that they were 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And maybe we need to have conversations about, well, not only cutting particular classes, but maybe cutting particular institutions, right, from our system. Yeah. But those are big decisions and not easily made.
Right, and it's easy for us to say this from the position of,
not my job that's getting cut.
Yeah, well, because we're lucky that because we are a teacher prep college, because there's a direct job, a required job, specifically elementary school teachers, physical education teachers, high school teachers, that emerge from our degree, it keeps us in a better position than most of the colleges.
We have a very strong pipeline into our school in particular.
And so that's, but so it's almost, it's hard for, true or not, it's coming from our position of privilege in that sense. It's a difficult thing to say, right?
Yeah, if I was at one of these other institutions, I don't know that I would be advocating for my institution to be cut. But I mean, at the same time, if it happened, I don't think, I would have to understand why it was happening.
Yeah.
But
tying back to the conversation we had about sustainability, where these institutions are experiencing under enrollment, I would like to see it as a wonderful opportunity for them as being transitional institutions, right? Like, let go of the modernity that you had previously being extolen because for whatever reasons in your particular geography of where you are, of how people perceive your credential, it's a failing institution. To save the institution, both for its historic legacy, both for the people that currently work there and are passionate about staying there, both for how the community benefits from having a university in its town, because a lot of towns suffer when the university or the college disappears. How can they transition to be programs that students do find desirable, right? Like, and that's not, again, you talked about bureaucracy, that's not an easy thing to make happen, but I think it's an important conversation to happen. Like, how can some of these failing colleges transform their mission so that they speak to different niches that maybe are yet underrepresented in, for example, survivalist programs, how you can learn to forage in the woods, right? Like, I think those kind of things slowly will be seen as more desirable things by young people to pursue.
Those sound like very interesting things to pursue. The difficulty in doing that, though, is that, well, you need to have people who have expertise or are willing to learn about those things. I don't know if you've experienced this. Maybe you less so than me, since you're a world traveler and love the new experience thing. But I definitely find that as I get older, I get more sedentary in my ways.
What is it?
And part of that is just that you get burdened with more responsibilities, and so you have less time to pick up new things, especially when you have a family and other things going on in your life.
And you might be more cynical about new fads too.
Well, man, I definitely want to throw those calculators out the window and go back to the abacus. So I hear you on that.
But I mean, a lot of people don't want to have to learn a thing. But if your choice is an institution that will fail, and then when your institution fails, you're going to be, if you want to stay in higher ed, and I understand I have colleagues and friends who have been at failing institutions and they move on from higher ed. They're like, oh, I had a negative experience in that downward spiral and I'm done. I'm going to go work in the private sector, whatever.
We should get one of them on the podcast.
I think that would be, yes, that would certainly, I can definitely have some right off the top of my head I can think of. But for those who want to stay in higher ed, it's going to be a situation of more and more colleges will close or shrink. And then there's not yet enough shrinking at the PhD production level, so you're just going to have greater competition for fewer spots. If that's the reality that we're going to be ever more facing every year, I think those who want to stay at their institution, if there's a capacity to reinvent what they offer to students.
And this is an interesting aspect of institutions that are government funded. Because there is so much inertia in government funding and the budget this year tends to follow the budget last year, it's not as responsive as something like you would find in a corporate capitalistic model where you need to adapt on an annual timeline, right, to demand.
Well, we should definitely revisit this question in a year or two when we see what the Department of Government Efficiency does towards federal education and state education.
Right,
funding.
and to see what happens with the Department of Education
in
if
general,
it exists.
yes, exactly. So
that'll be interesting as well. It's very hard for state institutions to adapt. Even though you might have a faculty willing to do so, you know how much work it is just to get a single new course approved.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Talking about transforming an institution to look towards the future or reinvent itself, like that's a decade-long project right there.
Yeah.
And then by that time, like your window of opportunity's passed, possibly.
Sure. And then giving that reality, you can understand why instead professors will just do what they can to preserve the job as is, right? And I certainly don't judge them for doing that because there's a very good chance if we're in that situation, and we may be in that situation.
Who knows? Yeah, it is certainly likely.
Yeah.
Or a possibility. Maybe not likely. Yeah. Well, anyway, it was an interesting conversation and kind of went to multiple different directions.
As they should.
As they should. Absolutely. And they do. So, any final concluding thoughts on this conversation?
I'm not sure if we really got to the bottom of why students are still going to college, but I think
it was a starting point.
Yeah, starting point. Yeah, and I think it also could be something. Well, I could just say that one thing I've asked my students is an interesting, and I get pretty consistent results over time. I give them this hypothetical. Okay, you're getting your degree right now, and either you or your parents are paying for this college. We're reasonable tuition compared to private schools, but still, it's an increasingly high tuition. I'm like, okay, what if you could have the same exact experience? Everything's the same: the professors, the learning, the courses, the facilities. But it's not our institution. It's a new institution that has no clout in the job market, right? It's let's call it rural state university, right? But that's the name. But essentially, we're telling you it's exactly the same. It's high bar of the professors and the experiences in social networking, but it's free, 100% free. You don't have to pay. You don't owe anything, but you don't have that name recognition, that credential. And they go, who would opt for the rural state as your institution? And on average, 20% would take the free education, right? By far, every class I've asked, and I've asked most of my classes, a notable majority to a very significant majority say, no, I'll take the debt because the credential.
Credential. So I think that speaks to a general pattern that people have in many different aspects of being risk averse.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Staying away from the unknown quantity, the untested thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting, and it's interesting to know that our students are choosing our institution in particular because it has a reputation.
Yeah.
And presumably they're in a good reputation.
Right, but it does speak, and I kind of point that this really does speak to that. Like what you're really saying is the most important thing out of this is what this degree will do for you in the job market, not about the quality of the experience.
Yeah.
When you could have then, I tell them that all that money you save on tuition, you could go travel the world, right? But like you said, the risk averse comes in. So
right, that's very interesting. Well,
cool. Yeah. Well, I think
as
always,
Jeremy.
Yeah, we have a lot more ideas for things to talk about in future episodes.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's call it a podcast there and sign off here.
All right, episode 1.
Yep, that's the. Oh, wait, episode 2 now.
Oh, is it? I thought we was about episode 1.
Oh. Well, we did get stuck on episode 1 for a long time. I think we are now moving forward with episode 2.
Okay, I think we need to have a conversation about this off script.
Okay.
Or off mic, off live recording.
Well, folks, if you have any thoughts for future podcasts, feel free to send those our way or send us comments about what you've heard here tonight.
And also, if you think you would be a good guest for the show, please drop us a line and tell us why.
Absolutely. All right. Good night.
Night all.